The science of building stuff, aka engineering, contributed and continues to contribute to the advancement of humanity. But just like any other field, it isn't without mishaps. And when these mishaps occur on large-scale projects, the ensuing chaos can be devastating. The Hyatt Regency Hotel in Kansas is one of the largest construction projects that were undertaken during a period when building regulations weren't followed to a T. Turns out that's not the best of ideas. Official construction of the 40-story mammoth structure began in 1978, and right off the bat, the proposed plan was already problematic. As per this initial plan, the 4th and 2nd story walkways were to be connected by a set of steel rods running from the ceiling, which would have meant using screw threads for the entire length of the steel rods. The idea was tossed away after the steel rods manufacturer objected, saying the threads could have easily been damaged during the construction process. So instead of having entire steel rods running from the ceiling to the 2nd floor walkway, the plan was modified such that the rods would just end at the 4th floor walkway. A new set of rods would then connect the 4th floor and 2nd floor walkways. This placed undue stress on the pair of rods running from the ceiling. A little nudge was all that was needed for the whole setup to fall apart. That nudge came on July 17th in 1981 during a dance with close to 1,600 people in the building's lobby. Both the 4th and 2nd floor walkways came crashing down, killing 114 people and injuring 216 others. To this day, the incident remains the deadliest non-deliberate structural failure in the history of the United States.
On April 20th, 2010, a powerful explosion rocks the Deepwater Horizon drilling platform in the Gulf of Mexico.
At the height of its operation, the Deepwater Horizon rig had dug the deepest oil well ever at 35,000 feet, but a 2010 blowout greatly dented the rig's reputation and had one of the most severe environmental effects in history. A blowout is basically an uncontrolled natural gas or crude oil release from the ground. The Deepwater Horizon oil spill started with a natural gas blowout that ignited, killing 11 crew members and injuring 17 others. The blowout caused the rig to capsize and sink, which gave the oil an unrestricted flow to the surface. And being under intense pressure, the oil really did flow. According to the US government, the amount of oil discharged could have peaked at 60,000 gallons per day, and by the time the situation was brought under control, a staggering 4.9 million barrels had been discharged. The mammoth discharge could have been prevented had the well been sealed sooner, but the attempts were largely unsuccessful. It took a good 4 months to put the spill to rest, which came at a heavy environmental impact. According to National Geographic, the spill's effects continue to plague animals such as dolphins, which have witnessed a 60% drop in successful pregnancies since the fateful months. Nicknamed the Iron Dam, the Bangxiao Dam in Henan Province, China, was considered an engineering wonder and an unbreakable piece of infrastructure. But as it later turned out, the praises were a bit misguided. For one, the dam had some serious flaws from the get-go. Right after completion, the dam was plagued with numerous cracks, which were immediately fixed. But that wasn't the only issue. The dam's sluice gates, 5 of them, were way fewer than the recommended 12 and poorly designed. In short, they were bound to underperform when the need arose. And that's exactly what happened in August 1975. After receiving a whole year's worth of rain in the space of 24 hours and bearing the brunt of Typhoon Nina, the region was heavily flooded, so it was only natural to drain some of the dams, including Bangxiao. And since the sluice gates weren't really up to this task, the dam failed and was considered by some as the worst structural failure in history. Nuclear power is a big fascination because of its cost-effectiveness and reliability, but it can be pretty messy when things get out of hand, like what happened in the 3 Mile Island plant. Built in 1974, the nuclear power plant was one of the most well-established plants in the US at the time and served its intended purpose pretty well, albeit for a short time. Disaster struck in the wee hours of March 28, 1979, when a pressure valve at one of the reactors failed to close, which allowed cooling water to drain out. As was expected, the emergency cooling pumps immediately went into action to mitigate the effects of the faulty valve. That would have been enough to prevent any major accident that day. But the plant operators had other ideas. Due to confusion, they shut down the emergency pumps, leaving the whole system to heat almost to a melting point. While the mishap was later fixed, its effects lingered at the plant for the next few days. The ensuing reactions from the excessive heat had created a hydrogen gas bubble that, in the event of an explosion, would have released a ton of harmful radiation into the atmosphere. Thankfully, that didn't happen and the bubble slowly disappeared as the system cooled. But by the end of the ordeal, the affected reactor was too damaged to be used again. Connecting Saint-Foy and Lévis, Quebec in Canada, the Quebec Bridge is the longest cantilever bridge on the planet, spanning over 3,200 feet. The cantilever bridge is built using structures called cantilevers, which function as a diving board anchored on one end and free on the other. The Quebec Bridge has been around since 1907, so it has seen better days, and 2 major incidents. By that year, the bridge had been under construction for 4 years, and it was well near completion. The only problem was that it wasn't looking very good. The bridge was too heavy to support itself due to some bad planning on the engineers' part. On one afternoon, as the workers were preparing to leave, part of the bridge plunged into the St. Lawrence River, killing 75 of the workers and injuring 11 of them, making it the worst bridge construction disaster in the world. The construction was put on hold but kicked off again in 1913. This too wasn't without issues. In September 1916, as the central span was being raised into position to complete the bridge, it fell into the river, taking with it 13 people. This time around though, reconstruction continued right away until the bridge was completed the following year. On January 28, 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger went up in flames a mere 70 seconds after takeoff. The whole 7-member crew perished, and the incident ended up costing the American taxpayer a whopping $3.2 billion, certainly one of the most expensive mistakes in history. Yes, a mistake since it could have been very well prevented. The engineers who were part of the space program had earlier on raised concerns about proceeding with the mission in the prevailing conditions, but for some reason these concerns were brushed aside. So what really happened? The chilly temperatures in Cape Canaveral, Florida, which was the site of the launch, had something to do with it. The O-rings that were used in a joint seal between the space shuttle and one of its solid rocket boosters weren't designed for the low temperatures. As a result, the O-rings failed at takeoff. The fuel from the SRB leaked and consequently set the space shuttle on a path of disintegration. It wasn't long before the shuttle blew up right before millions of people, including school kids who were watching the event live on TV. The issue of the O-rings had been known since at least 1977, but NASA wasn't keen on fixing it, terming it an acceptable flight risk. The 1928 collapse of St. Francis Dam in LA is one of the worst civil engineering disasters in the history of the United States. Going by the number of fatalities, it's the second greatest loss of life in California's history, right behind the 1906 San Francisco earthquake and fire that killed over 3,000 people. On its part, the dam's failure killed at least 432 people, but there could have been more since there were speculations that several Mexican immigrant workers could have been swept up by the ensuing floods. The biggest blame for the failure was attributed to the dam's site. On one hand, the location was perfect for a water reservoir, but on the other hand, the site didn't offer a solid enough foundation for the whole project, something that the engineers seemingly ignored. And they still didn't notice it later on when they gave it a safety approval. Just 12 hours after this, the dam went down. The project was led by Irish-born William Mulholland, a self-taught civil engineer. The dam's failure effectively ended his career. On February 1st, 2003, the Space Shuttle Columbia disintegrated as it re-entered the atmosphere, killing the entire 7-member crew. That was the second incident in NASA's Space Shuttle program after the 1986 explosion of the spacecraft Challenger. Columbia's disaster was sadly a recurring problem, a piece of foam that stuck on the shuttle's left wing after breaking off from the external fuel tank. For some reason, it wasn't fixed for the previous 27 missions that Space Shuttle Columbia had undertaken. While the piece of foam didn't have adverse effects in these missions, the last one proved fatal. The foam debris created a hole that allowed hot atmospheric gases to rush into the shuttle, consequently destroying it. The infamous Chernobyl disaster will forever remain a landmark moment not just in history of nuclear power, but the human race in general. Here's what happened. On April 25, 1986, the workers were carrying out a test on one of the facility's reactors to establish safety protocols in case there was a power outage. Such tests had been done 3 times but failed to provide the much-needed safety protocols. This fourth and last test was led by a largely unprepared staff, so trouble was in the offing. The staff's unpreparedness, flaunting of safety protocols, and a major design flaw in the reactor led to a huge explosion that tore both the reactor core and the building, immediately setting the place on fire. This chain of events was followed by the release of radioactive pollutants into the atmosphere. 36 hours after the incident, close to 49,000 people within a 6-mile radius had to be evacuated. A large chunk of these people were residents of Pripyat, a town that had been established to house the plant workers. To this day, the exclusion zone is still uninhabitable and might remain so for the next 20,000 years, according to scientists. The cleanup process, on the other hand, is slated to go on until... In the morning of November 7th, 1940, the first Tacoma Narrows Bridge plunged into the Tacoma Narrows Strait just 4 months after the official opening. With it went the prestigious glory of being the third longest suspension bridge at the time, and, of course, a good deal of money. Turns out the ambitious design hadn't taken into consideration the wind patterns over the strait, and the effect was noted way before the bridge was completed. The construction workers observed it moving up and down, which apparently didn't raise any concerns. So just like the other engineering disasters in this video, it was only a matter of time before misfortune struck. On the day of the collapse, winds traveling at 40 miles an hour blew over the bridge, setting it in an endless undulating motion. Eventually, a cable snapped, and the resultant twisting motion broke up the bridge, ending its 4-month operation. Luckily though, there weren't any casualties, except for a submerged car and a dog. But what turned out to be an epic failure had a positive effect on the engineering field and science in general. The incident would later spur research into bridge building that has since been pivotal in the designing of such long bridges.